You know, in all my years on this bench, and I've been doing this a long time now, I've learned that every person who walks through those courtroom doors carries a story. Some wear their stories on their faces, in the tired lines around their eyes, or the nervous trembling of their hands. Others hide them behind walls of pride, defiance, or fear. But that morning, when the bailiff called the next case, something in the air shifted. I felt it before I even looked up from my papers. The name on the docket read, Isabella Monttero Ashford, foreign sounding, hyphenated, the kind of name that tells you a story before you've even heard a word. The charges were straightforward enough. 3 unpaid parking tickets totaling $427 accumulated over 6 months. Simple enough, right? That's what I thought too. But when I raised my eyes to see who was approaching the bench, I immediately knew this was going to be different. She was young, couldn't have been more than 24, 25 years old, dressed impeccably in what I recognized as designer clothing, the kind my wife points out in magazines. A Hermes scarf draped elegantly around her shoulders, diamond studs catching the fluorescent courtroom light. Everything about her exterior screamed privilege, wealth, untouchability. But here's what caught me, what made me lean forward in my chair and really look, her hands. Despite the perfect manicure, those hands were shaking. Not the nervous tremor of someone worried about a fine, but something deeper, something wounded. She walked with her chin held high, almost defiantly so, but her eyes, and I've become something of an expert at reading eyes over the years, her eyes were red-rimmed, recently cried. The mascara was fresh, carefully reapplied, but I could see the slight puffiness underneath. This young woman had been weeping before she walked into my courtroom, and she was using every ounce of willpower to hold herself together. Behind her stood a man in an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than some people's cars. Her attorney, no doubt. He had that look, the one that says, I bill by the hour and every hour costs a fortune. He was already shuffling through papers, preparing what I suspected would be some elaborate legal defense for what were essentially parking tickets. Now, I want you to understand something about my courtroom. Providence Municipal Court isn't fancy. We're not dealing with the high-profile cases you see on television. We handle the everyday stuff, the parking violations, the minor traffic infractions, the small claims that somehow become everything to the people involved. And in this room, I've made it my life's mission to see beyond the paperwork, beyond the charges, beyond even the evidence sometimes. I look for the human being. Because that's what we forget, isn't it? Behind every case number is a person with a heartbeat, with fears and hopes and struggles we can't possibly imagine from the outside. So when this young woman, this Isabella, stepped forward, and I saw that strange combination of armor and vulnerability, I set down my pen, I took off my reading glasses, and I did what I always do when something tells me to pay attention. I gave her my full presence. Not the judge, not the authority figure, just Frank. Just another human being trying to understand another. Good morning, I said, keeping my voice gentle. Please, step forward. She approached the bench, and up close I could smell expensive perfume mixed with something else, the salt of tears perhaps. The attorney moved to speak, but I held up my hand. Something told me I needed to hear from her directly. The expensive suit could wait. Before we get into the legal particulars, I said, looking directly at her, why don't you tell me, how are you doing today? She blinked. Clearly that wasn't the question she was expecting. For a moment, just a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw something raw underneath, something lost. And that's when I knew this hearing was going to be about so much more than parking tickets. Now, when I asked that young woman how she was doing, her attorney, Mr. Pemberton, as I learned, nearly jumped out of his Italian leather shoes. He stepped forward with that practiced confidence that comes from years of expensive education and country club memberships and said, Your Honor, if I may, my client is prepared to present a formal motion to dismiss these charges on the grounds of diplomatic immunity. Diplomatic immunity in Providence Municipal Court for parking tickets. I'll admit I had to suppress a small smile. In my decades on this bench, I've heard just about every defense imaginable. I've heard that the parking meter was broken, that the dog was having an emergency, that the defendant was abducted by aliens. Yes, that actually happened once. But diplomatic immunity for 3 parking tickets in Providence, Rhode Island, that was a new one. I looked at the attorney. Diplomatic immunity, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. That's an interesting approach, Counselor. Why don't you help me understand what you mean by that? Mr. Pemberton straightened his tie, a nervous habit I've noticed among lawyers who aren't as confident as they appear. Your Honor, my client's father is Ambassador Eduardo Monttero, currently serving as the Brazilian ambassador to the United Nations. Under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, family members of diplomatic personnel are entitled to certain immunities from local jurisdiction. I nodded slowly, processing this. An ambassador's daughter. That explained the designer clothes, the expensive attorney, the air of someone accustomed to a different world than my little courtroom. But here's the thing about diplomatic immunity, and I've dealt with this before, it's not a magic wand. It doesn't make things disappear just because it's inconvenient to deal with them. And more importantly, the person standing before me wasn't a diplomat. She was a young woman who looked like she was carrying the weight of something far heavier than a few parking tickets. I appreciate the legal argument, Counselor, I said, but before we go down that road, I'd like to hear from your client directly. I turned to Isabella. Talk to me. Help me understand what's been going on. The attorney started to object, but Isabella raised her hand, a small gesture, but one that silenced him immediately. For the first time, she met my eyes directly, and I saw a flicker of something there. Not defiance exactly, but a weary kind of determination, the look of someone who's been fighting battles no one else can see. Your Honor, she began, her voice careful, controlled, with just a trace of an accent, Portuguese, softened by what sounded like American boarding school education. I want to be honest with you. My attorney advised me to claim diplomatic immunity. He said it would make all of this go away. She paused, and I could see her gathering herself. But I'm tired of things just going away. I'm tired of pretending. Now we were getting somewhere. I leaned forward slightly, giving her my full attention. What are you tired of pretending about? I asked gently. She glanced at her attorney, then back at me. These parking tickets, they happened in front of the same building, a medical office on Waterman Street. I was there 3 times a week for 4 months. I kept meaning to pay the tickets, but Her voice faltered. I was dealing with other things. What kind of medical office? I asked, though something in my gut was already beginning to understand. There was a long silence. In the gallery behind her, I could hear the usual shuffling and murmuring of people waiting for their own cases, but in that moment, it felt like the whole room was holding its breath. It was a cancer treatment center, she finally said. Oncology. I was receiving chemotherapy for stage 2 breast cancer. The courtroom went completely silent. Even the usual background noise seemed to evaporate. I sat back in my chair, feeling that familiar weight settle in my chest. The weight I feel every time someone's story suddenly becomes so much bigger than the charges on paper. I looked at this young woman again, really looked at her. The designer scarf around her shoulders, I realize now, wasn't just a fashion statement. It was covering her neck, hiding what were probably the effects of treatment. The perfect makeup wasn't vanity, it was armor. She was 24 years old, fighting for her life, and she had walked into my courtroom expecting to be treated like just another privileged person trying to escape consequences. Isabella, I said softly, using her first name deliberately, wanting her to know I saw her as a person, not a case file. I'm so sorry to hear that. How are you doing now? Are you still in treatment? Her eyes welled up, but she didn't let the tears fall. I finished my last round of chemo 3 weeks ago, she said. I'm in remission now, but it's been... She stopped, pressing her lips together, fighting for composure. It's been the hardest year of my life. Now I've been on this bench for many years, and I've learned that the first truth someone tells you is rarely the complete truth. Not because people are dishonest, though some certainly are, but because the deepest wounds are the hardest to reveal, especially in a public courtroom with strangers watching. So when Isabella mentioned the chemotherapy, I sensed there was more. Call it intuition, call it experience, call it whatever you like. Something told me to keep listening. You said it's been the hardest year of your life, I said gently. Tell me about that. I'm here to listen. Her attorney shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the kind of legal proceeding he was accustomed to, I'm sure. No objections to raise, no precedents to cite. Just a judge asking a young woman to share her story. But Isabella, and I give her credit for this, she understood what I was offering. Not judgment, just understanding. Your Honor, when I was diagnosed, she began, her voice stronger now, as if speaking the truth was giving her strength. I was supposed to be finishing my master's degree at Brown. International relations. My father, the ambassador, He had my whole life planned out. I was going to join the diplomatic corps, follow in his footsteps, make the family proud. She paused, and I watched her twist the designer ring on her finger, a nervous habit, unconscious, revealing. When I got sick, I had to drop out of school. I had to pause everything, and my father, another pause, longer this time. My father is not a man who understands pause. He doesn't understand weakness or illness or anything that disrupts the plan. Where is your father now? I asked. New York, at the UN. He's very busy, very important work. The words came out flat, practiced, like a press release, but the pain behind them was anything but rehearsed. He hasn't visited since my diagnosis. Not once. He sends money. He sends his assistant to check on me. He hired Mr. Pemberton to make this inconvenience disappear, but he hasn't come himself. I felt a familiar ache in my heart, the ache of a father hearing about another father's failure. Because here's what I know after decades of marriage, of raising my own children, of watching families come through this courtroom. Children don't need our money. They don't need our titles or our connections or our diplomatic immunity. They need our presence. They need to know that when life brings them to their knees, we'll be there to help them stand. And your mother? I asked softly. The first tear fell then. Isabella caught it quickly, almost angrily, as if it had betrayed her by escaping. My mother passed away when I was 12. Cancer, the same kind. She let out a breath that sounded like it carried years of suppressed grief. When I was diagnosed, the doctors said it might be genetic, that there might be a connection, and all I could think about was that I was going to die alone, like she did, because my father couldn't bear to watch someone he loved be sick again. The courtroom was absolutely silent. I could hear the ancient ventilation system humming, the distant sound of traffic outside on Dorrance Street. Every person in that gallery was frozen, suspended in the gravity of this young woman's revelation. Isabella, I said, and my voice was rough with emotion I wasn't trying to hide. I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear me. You are not alone. Do you understand? You are not alone. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something shift in her expression. The armor was cracking, the walls were coming down, and in that moment, in my humble courtroom in Providence, Rhode Island, something was being healed that had nothing to do with parking tickets. I went through every treatment by myself, she continued, the words coming faster now as if a dam had broken. Every chemo session, every scan, every terrifying wait for results. My friends didn't know. I was too proud to tell them, too ashamed, because in my family, you don't show weakness. You don't admit that you're scared. You handle things. You make things go away, like these parking tickets. She almost laughed, but it came out more like a sob. I parked illegally because I was too weak from the treatments to walk far. I didn't pay the tickets because I could barely remember my own name some days. And when they sent me the court summons, my father's solution was to claim diplomatic immunity, to make it disappear, like always, like everything. She straightened her shoulders, and I saw a flash of steel in her eyes. But I don't want to make things disappear anymore, Your Honor. I want to face them. I want to be accountable. I want to be a person who deals with life, not someone who hides behind privilege and immunity, and a father who couldn't even come to court with his own daughter because he had a more important meeting at the United Nations. She reached up and, in a gesture that took my breath away, removed the Hermes scarf from around her neck. Underneath, I could see the faint marks from her port, the small medical device used to deliver chemotherapy, her battle scars, her proof of survival. I'm not asking for immunity, she said, her voice clear and strong. I'm asking to be treated like everyone else, because that's something my father never gave me the chance to be. You know, in a courtroom, you develop a sense for the energy in the room. After all these years, I can feel when the gallery is bored, when they're anxious, when they're moved. And in that moment, after Isabella removed her scarf and spoke those words, I felt something I don't often experience in my line of work, collective reverence. Every single person in that room understood they were witnessing something profound, something real. I looked at the charges again. 3 parking tickets, $427. In the grand scheme of things, a minor matter, but in the context of what this young woman had been through, fighting for her life, fighting her loneliness, fighting the expectations of a father who valued appearance over presence, those tickets represented something much larger. They represented a moment in time when she was too overwhelmed by life to handle the small things. And who among us hasn't been there? Mr. Pemberton, I said, addressing the attorney, I appreciate you bringing the diplomatic immunity argument to my attention. It's a valid legal avenue, and I'm sure you've prepared extensive documentation to support it. He nodded, reaching for his briefcase. However, I continued, and he paused, I don't believe we'll be needing that today. I turned back to Isabella. Young lady, you just taught everyone in this courtroom something important. You taught us that true strength isn't about the power to avoid consequences. It's about the courage to face them. You could have walked in here, let your lawyer do the talking, invoked your father's position, and walked out without a scratch. But you didn't. You chose truth. You chose accountability. You chose to be seen. I paused, feeling the emotion in my own voice. And I want you to know that I see you, not as an ambassador's daughter, not as a case number, not as a set of parking violations. I see you as a brave young woman who has faced down something terrifying and come out the other side. And I see you as someone who deserves compassion, not just from this court, but from your father, who should be here today, who should have been there every day. The gallery behind her murmured in agreement. Several people nodded. The elderly woman was still crying, but now she was smiling too. This is what I love about my job, you know. These moments, these connections, this reminder that underneath all the laws and procedures and legal formalities, we are all just human beings trying to find our way. And sometimes the most important thing a judge can do is not to judge at all, but to understand. So here we were, the moment of judgment. Isabella stood before me, having laid bare her struggles, her fears, her yearning to be treated as an ordinary person rather than a diplomat's daughter. Her attorney stood beside her, his briefcase full of legal arguments he no longer needed, and the courtroom waited, suspended in that peculiar silence that precedes a ruling. I picked up my gavel, not to use it, but just to feel its weight in my hand. It's a habit I have. Holding that piece of wood reminds me of the responsibility I carry. Every decision I make from this bench affects someone's life. And while parking tickets might seem trivial compared to the cases you see on the evening news, they matter to the people involved. They're real, and they deserve to be treated with care. Isabella, I began, first I want to address the matter of diplomatic immunity. Your attorney has raised this as a potential defense, and I want to be clear about something. Even if you had pursued that avenue, I would have had concerns about its application. Diplomatic immunity is meant to protect diplomats in the performance of their official duties, not to shield their family members from municipal parking violations. But we don't need to debate international law today because you've already made your position clear. You don't want immunity, you want accountability, and I respect that more than I can say. I set down the gavel and leaned forward, folding my hands on my desk. Now, regarding the 3 parking tickets totaling $427, let me tell you what I see when I look at these violations. I see a young woman who was going through the fight of her life. I see someone who was walking into that cancer center 3 times a week, not knowing if the treatments would work, not knowing what the future held. I see a person whose mind was consumed with survival, with fear, with loneliness, and in the midst of all that, remembering to feed a parking meter was probably the last thing on her mind. Isabella nodded slowly, her eyes glistening but her expression hopeful. I also see something else, I continued. I see a young woman who, despite having every possible advantage in life, wealth, connections, legal resources, chose to stand before this court and take responsibility. You could have hidden behind your father's title. You could have let your attorney make this all disappear, but you didn't. You stood up and said, "This is who I am. This is what I've been through, and I want to be treated fairly." That takes courage, that takes character, and that tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are. I paused, looking around the courtroom. Every eye was on me. I could feel the weight of expectation, the hope that justice would be not just blind, but kind. "Here's my ruling," I said. "I am dismissing all 3 parking violations completely. No fines, no fees, no points on your record." A murmur went through the gallery. Isabella's eyes widened. Even her attorney looked surprised. "But," I continued, holding up my hand, "I'm not dismissing them because of who your father is. I'm not dismissing them because of diplomatic immunity or legal technicalities. I'm dismissing them because of who you are, because you've already paid a price far greater than any fine this court could impose. You've paid with months of fear and pain and isolation. You've paid with the disappointment of a father who should have been there and wasn't. And you've paid with the courage it took to stand here today and tell your truth. I stood up from my chair, something I rarely do during a ruling, and looked directly at Isabella. Young lady, I want you to hear this, and I want everyone in this courtroom to hear it too. You have value, you have worth, not because of your family name or your education or your father's position, but because of who you are inside, because of the strength you've shown, because of the person you're choosing to become. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was smiling, a real smile, maybe the first one she'd worn in months. And I have one more thing to say, I added. This is for anyone watching, anyone who might find themselves in a similar situation. Life is going to knock you down sometimes. It's going to throw things at you that seem impossible to handle. And when that happens, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not have everything together. It's okay to park in the wrong spot because you're too tired or too scared or too sick to walk the extra block. What's not okay is facing those struggles alone when you don't have to. I looked at Mr. Pemberton. Counselor, when you speak to Ambassador Monttero, and I trust you will, please tell him that his daughter was remarkable in court today. Tell him that she showed the kind of integrity and courage that would make any father proud. And tell him, I paused, choosing my words carefully. Tell him that diplomatic immunity is a poor substitute for showing up, that the only title that really matters is Dad, and that there's still time, if he's willing to use it, to be the father his daughter deserves. I sat back down and picked up my gavel. Case dismissed. Isabella, I wish you continued good health, much happiness, and a long life filled with people who see you for who you truly are. You are going to do wonderful things, I'm sure of it. I struck the gavel once gently, and it was over. But as Isabella walked out of my courtroom, stopping to shake my hand with tears still on her cheeks, I knew this case would stay with me. Not because of diplomatic immunity or legal arguments, but because of a young woman who had the courage to be vulnerable, to be honest, to be human. And isn't that what we all want, really? To be seen, to be heard, to be treated with compassion when life brings us to our knees. That's what I try to offer in my courtroom. Not perfection, not always the legally correct answer, but humanity, understanding, and the belief that mercy is never wasted on those who need it most. God bless you all. And remember, be kind to each other. You never know what battles the person next to you is fighting.